Good evening, I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily News for Tuesday, March 1st. And tonight, Canada makes a new move for the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine. Canada wants the International Criminal Court to open an investigation against Russia for possible crimes against humanity. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly made the announcement in Geneva. This was after she and other Western diplomats walked out of Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's address to the UN Human Rights Council. Yesterday, an ICC prosecutor said he had decided to open an investigation because he found there was a reasonable basis to believe war crimes and crimes against humanity have been committed in Ukraine. Well, this comes as Canada, along with allied nations, are pushing to end the biggest land conflict since World War II. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly makes a trip today to the Poland-Ukraine border. She's there to ensure Canada's latest supply of military aid makes it into the war-ravaged country. A significant enhancement in lethal military aid for Ukraine can be delivered later. Canada will be providing 125 portable anti-tank weapons and 2,000 rockets from the CAF arsenal. All right, turning to a look at the economy. As Statistics Canada reports, the economy grew by 6.7% in the fourth quarter of last year and by 4.6% for all of 2021. The full year figure was a major improvement over the decline of 5.2% recorded in 2020, the first year of the pandemic. Household spending and residential construction were the biggest contributors to economic growth last year. This comes as new home construction, resales, and renovations increased at near record levels. Back to the conflict in Ukraine, as the Canadian representative for the United Nations Refugee Agency says most of the more than 600,000 people who have fled Ukraine hope to return someday. Rima Jamous says it's too early to begin to resettle refugees in Canada and other countries. Instead, she says refugees will need humanitarian support as current resources are likely to run out quickly. Meanwhile, Google is blocking the YouTube channels of Russian state broadcaster RT and Sputnik in Europe due to the war in Ukraine. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau also said yesterday he wants the CRTC to review the presence of RT on Canadian airwaves. Rogers, Bell, and Shaw have all pulled the Kremlin-backed broadcaster from their channels. Spring may look a little bit different this year in Canada. The Weather Network says Canadians should expect a temperature roller coaster across the country this spring. Chief Meteorologist Chris Scott says BC will see a few more storm systems and more precipitation than normal in southern and central BC. The prairies could see more turbulent temperatures, while Ontario and Quebec will be wetter than usual and won't see consistent warm spring weather before late April. Atlantic Canada is in for near normal temperatures, but also some late season winter storms. And below normal temperatures are expected for most of Yukon and the Northwest Territories, while Nunavut will be near normal. Moving to Canada's airspace, Transport Canada is investigating how a Russian airline broke a ban on Russian planes in Canadian skies. The government agency says Aeroflot Flight 111 from Miami to Moscow on Sunday violated the prohibition on our airspace that Ottawa imposed hours earlier in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Meanwhile, the Yukon Liquor Corporation says it will no longer buy or sell products made in Russia for the foreseeable future in response to the Ukraine crisis. The territory says Russian Standard will be removed from the Yukon Liquor Corporation's 6 liquor stores and warehouse. It says the Yukon Liquor Corporation stocks one product produced in Russia. It says stores can receive returns of Russian Standard from licensees or customers. In Ontario, most major COVID-19 public health measures are over as of today. But Premier Doug Ford says mask mandates will remain for a couple more weeks. In Saskatchewan, the provincial mask mandate has ended, and businesses and other groups are now facing a choice of whether to be masked or unmasked in their premises. Alberta's province-wide requirement to wear masks in most public places ends today, but Edmonton says its own mask bylaw will remain in effect, and it is asking residents for their opinions in an online survey. Ottawa is being asked to take a harder line as countries such as China and Iran increasingly turn to digital technologies to target human rights and pro-democracy advocates living here in Canada. The Canadian government is also being urged to better support people affected by such digital repression. The recommendations are contained in a new report today from the University of Toronto's Citizen Lab, which is one of Canada's leading cybersecurity research centres. It is titled Psychological and Emotional War, Digital Transnational Repression in Canada. All right, stay with us. When we come back from break, a look at energy security and national security. Stay with us. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has destabilized both world order and the global economy. Surging oil prices and increasing financial pressure for Canada and Western allies of energy exporting giant Russia are adding to uncertainty about the global economic outlook. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced that in addition to sending military aid to Ukraine, Canada will ban the import of Russian crude oil. Canada is the world's fourth largest oil producer, right behind Russia, but Canada still imported almost $300 million worth of Russian energy products last year, according to Statistics Canada. However, one expert says that even without sanctions, Russia's invasion will increase the shortage of oil and gas, driving up prices. With us to discuss energy security as national security is Dr. Brenda Schaefer, Senior Advisor for Energy at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Ma'am, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you.
So let's start with how the invasion of Ukraine is affecting energy security around the world.
So the invasion and the resulting policies are really giving an unprecedented jolt to the international energy markets, especially oil markets. This is bigger than the 1973 oil crisis in terms of how much volumes are being disrupted. We've never really ever experienced anything like this, where maybe 7 to 8% of global oil will be removed from the market. We have both Russian oil and inadvertently oil from Kazakhstan, because most of it is exported on the Black Sea in Russian ports. So we're really in an unprecedented oil market.
And these sanctions are likely to make things worse. But how will these sanctions affect Canada's oil supply in particular?
Well, obviously, high oil prices are good for Canadian producers. It's good for, obviously, for the Canadian economy. But on the other hand, what we're having so much disruption, through to the global economy, that we might be very close to a global recession. So this might be a very short-lived, increase in revenue to Canadian oil producers, but certainly in the long run, this can easily trigger a global recession.
Some very concerning information there, Doctor. Well, in an article, you suggest that Western governments need to change their approaches to energy policy. So how can Western governments go about doing that?
Well, 5 years ago, or even, in the United States up to a year ago, in Europe up to 5 years ago, it was clear that energy security is part of national security, and that you have to provide, for energy security in order to have your independence, in order for, Western life to continue, in order to have a stable global economy as well. Well, about a year, definitely with the Biden administration in the United States, the last European Commission, they've decided to, really ignore the dynamics of energy security. We'll learn a lot tonight. Tonight there's a State of the Union address of the president, and so far from the signals that are being sent out, the U.S. the administration isn't thinking about doing something new, in terms of to incentivize more U.S. production. But really, U.S. and Canada are maybe some of the, especially the United States, one of the only places that in a matter of 3 to 4 months could make a difference in the state of the oil market and really, rev up production. And so far, all the policies of the U.S. administration have been to actually suppress U.S. production.
And we know the Biden administration is working to secure a nuclear deal with Iran, which is known for its oil supply. So would this potential deal increase the world's oil supply in turn?
Well, in the short run, not really, because a lot of their oil is already being sold, especially to China. Most of the oil that they have at sea, the stored oil, is not of the same grades that could replace the Russian oil. A lot of it is condensate, which is a very light oil or liquid gas. And really, who's really benefiting right now from the situation of the oil market is China, because they're able to buy Iranian oil and Russian oil at a steep discount. Probably soon they'll be able to buy more Kazakhstani oil at a discount. So the only major market benefiting from this situation of the oil prices is China, and it's probably not exactly the goal of the policies. Essentially, even if oil isn't explicitly sanctioned, companies, banks, financial institutions are so averse to even touching anything right now that might somehow be sanctionable that they're staying away really from anything Russian. And so we're having really essentially oil sanctioned. And also the divestments of companies like Shell, BP, that are pulling out of Russia. So that's stock value that's really in billions of dollars that's just being wiped out overnight, and we're seeing already the results in the stock markets.
All right, Dr. Schaefer, thank you again for your insight today on Forum Daily.
Thank you.
Stay with us. When we come back after the break, we'll be taking a look at mental health and mental health care in Canada. Stay with us. With over 2 years into this global pandemic, the chronic stress associated with it is taking a toll on individuals and organizations. New research by the Canadian Mental Health Association and UBC indicates most Canadians worry that COVID will never go away. On top of that, people are also concerned about what comes next, with concerns around new variants and recovering from pandemic-related trauma or grief. According to the study, researchers are seeing chronic stress in the population, which is making decisions harder, draining people's energy, and leaving many tired and burnt out. Meanwhile, community mental health organizations are drawing on shallow reserves to meet people's needs. Well, joining us now to tell us more about this latest research on mental health during the pandemic is Ms. Sarah Kennel, the National Director of Public Policy for the CMHA. Ma'am, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you for having me.
So what would you say are the key takeaways from this study?
Well, really, what the research is telling us is that the pandemic, no surprise, our fatigue has set in. Canadians are emotionally overwhelmed and exhausted. We know that a third of Canadians are feeling anxious and worried, and nearly half of Canadians feel stressed and worried about not being able to cope with uncertainty. People aren't getting the mental health supports they need, and we know that those needs are growing. And despite the fact that personally we know we can endure periods of crisis, and the systems that we rely on can endure crisis. 2 years in, though, the acute stress in the population and our systems is really becoming chronic stress, which is suggesting that if we don't act now, we risk further deteriorations in our mental health and cracks in our system.
I'm sure a lot of our viewers can relate to this. Now, considering this is round 4 of CMHA's research into the impacts of COVID, how does Canada's mental health currently compare to early on in the pandemic? Did it maybe improve?
Yeah, no, unfortunately not. Despite the fact that we saw the most significant deteriorations in mental health earlier during the pandemic throughout the course of 2020, we know that the numbers remain high. Many Canadians are continuing to express declines in their mental health, the highest being in May 2021, when 41% of the population expressed those feelings. Now we're down to 37. Similarly, 51% of Canadians expressed being worried or stressed about not being able to cope with uncertainty in 2020. This is now down to 39%. But what's really concerning for us is that we're seeing these numbers plateau. And so we're seeing heightened and sustained levels of stress, anxiety, depression, coupled with new stresses, including the emergence of new variants, that feeling of not being able to cope with uncertainty, the worry around COVID becoming endemic, and also the compounding stresses that we're feeling beyond COVID related to the climate crisis, to reconciliation with Indigenous people, to racial justice, the current crisis in Ukraine. These are all taking a toll on Canadians' mental health.
And on top of all of this, we mentioned community mental health organizations are drawing on shallow reserves to meet people's needs. So tell us a little bit more about the current state of mental health care in Canada.
Yeah, the pandemic has only increased the need for mental health services. We know through this research, and of course, anecdotally, speaking with friends and family, wait lists are long. Access to virtual services has been a tale of two pandemics for us. On the one hand, it's allowed those living in rural and remote areas to access mental health care for the first time. However, for others, it's led to barriers in access to care for folks who don't have access to reliable internet or cell phone plans, et cetera. We also know that the system is patchwork. It can be very confusing. It's a piecemeal kind of cobbing together of private, public, and community-based services. It can be really hard to navigate at the individual level. Furthermore, funding remains piecemeal. It isn't sustainable, and it's creating patchwork systems at play and a lack of sustainability. And finally, the toll that the pandemic has had on the community mental health workforce has been significant. We know that mental health workers are disproportionately affected by burnout and stress. They experience trauma on a day-to-day basis just by the very nature of the work that they do. They also have lower wages. So the impact the pandemic has had has been significant on Canadians' mental health, but also the people who serve them.
All right, just a quick 30 seconds left here, ma'am, but what steps need to be taken to improve this overall issue here?
We need political will and we need investment, really. These aren't new solutions, but really it's about ensuring that further investments are made in dedicated mental health services, particularly counseling and psychotherapy. We also need to see greater attention on the social determinants of health, recognizing that mental health isn't in a vacuum. We need affordable housing, nutritious food, employment, stable and sustainable employment. These things are part and parcel of maintaining good mental health, so we need to see equal investment there as well.
Ms. Kennel, thank you again for joining us for this important conversation on Forum Daily.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up after the break, we take a look at news happening around the world, of course, so stay tuned. We'll be right back. Russian shelling pounded the central square in Ukraine's second largest city today. This in an attack that Ukraine's president calls undisguised terror and nothing short of a war crime. The military assault on Kharkiv and a massive convoy of tanks threatening the capital Kyiv led Vladimir Zelensky to accuse Moscow of resorting to terror tactics. As the fighting reached beyond military targets on day 6 of the Russian invasion, reports emerged that Moscow has used cluster bombs on 3 populated areas. The Kremlin denies it has used such munitions. Mr. Zelensky has told the European Parliament that his country is fighting to be equal members of Europe. Meanwhile, French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire says Western sanctions against Moscow for its invasion of Ukraine are going to cause the Russian economy to collapse. He says Russia's foreign exchange reserves are disappearing into thin air, and Vladimir Putin's notorious war chest is all but empty. Mr. Le Maire added that the Russian central bank having to raise interest rates means that companies won't have access to affordable loans, and therefore won't be able to invest and develop the Russian economy. Also today, the world's biggest shipping company, AP Moller-Maersk, says all new bookings to and from Russia will be suspended, with the exception of foodstuffs, medical and humanitarian supplies. The Russian economy may be hitting a downward trend, but Asian shares mostly rose on Tuesday. This comes as global investors eyed talks aimed at ending the Russian military assault on Ukraine, which so far have yielded just an agreement to keep talking. Surging oil prices and increasing financial pressure from the U.S., Canada, and Western allies on energy exporting giant Russia are adding to uncertainty about the global economic outlook. The April gold contract also climbed over $13 as investors sought out safe havens. Tens of thousands of people have been ordered to evacuate their homes as Australia's southeast coast is inundated by the worst flooding in decades. Flooding has claimed at least 9 lives. Scores of residents spent hours trapped on their roofs by a fast-rising river in Lismore in northern New South Wales state. Toyota wants to get back up and running in Japan after a cyber attack. Production will resume on Wednesday at all of Toyota's 14 plants in Japan after they were idled for a day due to the attack on a domestic supplier. Kojima Industries said it found a virus in its computer server and it was investigating. Toyota says while the server problem was not yet resolved, they have devised alternative ways to operate. A landmark law has been passed in Minnesota. The House of Representatives has passed legislation with bipartisan support today that would make it illegal to discriminate against someone because of their hairstyle. The Crown Act, an acronym meaning creating a respectful and open world for natural hair, would add hairstyle and texture to a provision in the Minnesota Human Rights Act. The bill's author cited an incident when an employer banned hairstyles worn by Black employees, like afros, braids, and dreadlocks, and proceeded to fire employees who refused to cut their hair. Russia is paying the price on the ice for its invasion of Ukraine. The National Hockey League and International Ice Hockey Federation are condemning the invasion and urging a peaceful resolution as quickly as possible. The IHF is ejecting Russia from tournaments in every age category. The NHL is severing its business relationships in Russia, this while expressing concern about the well-being of Russians on the roster of NHL clubs. A Japanese study shows that doing muscle strengthening exercises up to 60 minutes per week is associated with lower risk of heart disease, cancer, and all-cause mortality. Researchers reviewed 16 prospective studies published between 2012 to 2020. 3 studies found that combining aerobic exercise and strength training was associated with 40% lower all-cause mortality. People are out to party as New Orleans' first full-dress Mardi Gras since 2020 dawns today. There will be a day of back-to-back parades throughout the city. This comes 1 year after parades were canceled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Some of Canada's Ukrainian restaurants are seeing a rush of customers amid the ongoing Russian invasion. This as they look to bounce back from COVID-19 restrictions. Tetiana Barrelko's family-run restaurant and bar, called Barrel House Korchma in Toronto, has been navigating a flood of people wanting to dine in and order takeout over the past several days. Uncle Ed's Ukrainian restaurant in Edmonton is also seeing a pickup in support amid the crisis overseas. The business plans to donate a percentage of sales to an organization helping Ukrainians this week. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time on Forum Daily News.